Hello there, and welcome to the Tammy Tuckey Show. My name is Tammy Tuckey, and it's good to see you. So 2001 marked Walt Disney's 100th birthday celebration, and I'd say many of us remember that also being the year of the 100 Years of Magic celebration that was at Walt Disney World, and it celebrated his birthday starting on October 1st of that year, and it also included One Man's Dream, which was that wonderful exhibit at MGM Studios. But before this celebration, on September 16th, 2001, ABC Family, I think it was just called ABC at the time, The Wonderful World of Disney premiered a special documentary that was made about the man behind the myth of the company itself. So it is 25 years later, and this is Walt, the man behind the myth.
It opens with that wonderful shot of Walt sitting at his drawing board. This is Walt Disney at the beginning of his journey.
The name of the first film, which was the test film that he used, was called Alice's Wonderland, and it was shot in my mother's house.
He had a little car, and he would drive Mother and another young woman that worked for him then home every evening, and Mother took great delight in the fact that even though Mother was the nearest, he would take the other girl home first and then drop Mother off on the way back.
The multiplane camera had levels, and then the camera, if it panned down through these levels, you got a third dimension effect.
Walt would go to the park early in the morning before the park opened, and he'd get in the fire truck and drive the fire truck around Disneyland. And people would think he was crazy, but what he was doing was playing with his toy.
So this evening, we're celebrating 25 years with the director and writer, Jean-Pierre, and Katherine and Richard, who are also fellow writers on the project. So welcome, you guys. How are you?
We're doing good. Thank you, Tammy.
We can't believe it's 25 years.
I know.
And it was so much fun to watch that again after a while.
After 24 years.
Yeah.
And it's very high definition quality. That's why when you guys sent it over, I was like, oh, this is perfect.
Well, there is a little story about that, because when we originally filmed all the scenes and the footage and the interviews, it was destined for ABC broadcast and NTSC, which is that boxy format that we had until the 2010s. But in discussions with Richard and Katherine, we decided, we think there might be high definition on the horizon. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but somewhere down the hill, there will be high definition. So we shot the whole film in widescreen film, not video, on widescreen film, even though for the immediate ABC broadcast, and that broadcast is another story, by the way, we had to shrink it down, to that 4:3 aspect ratio that we used to look at in those square TVs. And then in 2016, the Disney Family Foundation came back and said, we would like to go to HD. Is that possible? We said, yes. Nice. So we had to recut and reproduce, really, the whole film from scratch. We had all the film retransferred at Photochem in high definition format. The soundtrack is the same, but every frame in that picture that we now have was re-edited and redone and rescanned from the original negative. So we kept the negatives in a special vault because we knew this day would come, and now the day has come.
And I'll take it even a step before that. Prior to there being any filming, when Kathy, JP's wife and partner, and Catherine and myself were talking about this, we initially intended and we proposed to do it on video, not on film. And the Disney family, because film is very expensive, and the Disney family said, no, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it right, and it'll be film.
Yeah, and all of us, all through this, inspired by Walt Disney, who was always doing the next thing that people weren't doing yet. And I mean, we have kept talking about, plussing the way he did.
Quality over quantity, right? Because I feel that that's not really something that's thought about a lot in film nowadays, especially everything is online. So I did find it right before our broadcast. I'm just glad I have physical media. Here's my original VHS tape copy of it. And I love having my physical media, but I got the DVD, the HD update that you had, which was just beautiful to see that, just everything looks so clear as crystal. I'm so glad you did it on film. I love that. So when did the Disney family come to you first about this project, or did you as a trio think about this idea and say, hey, let's bring it to the table and see if the family's interested?
The whole project started many steps before. Kath and I had written a book called The Man Behind the Magic, which got us started in the Disney business, in the Walt Disney biography business. There were other steps in between, and JP and Kathy and Catherine and myself created a CD-ROM based biography of Walt Disney, which we thought was going to be the greatest thing in the world. We were going to make $1 million. Everybody else was going to too. And then, of course, the internet came along, and people stopped buying those kind of CDs. It was based on the CD that the idea came, hey, wait, why don't we take it one step further and make a full documentary?
And the wonderful thing is that it was just, some divine light was shining on this production, because Diane Disney Miller said, well, that sounds great. And Diane Disney was the executive producer, of course. And but she said, why don't we do a test? Why don't we, do some tests? And as a result, back in 2000, we already started interviewing some of the top people that had worked with Disney, who shortly thereafter passed away. So we have wonderful interviews with people who really knew Walt intimately, and we wouldn't have been able to do that if we hadn't done those original test interviews. And then, of course, when Diane and Ron saw the footage that we had shot with Eric Trageser as our director of photography, they were so impressed. They said, "Let's go for the whole film."
Your audience might be familiar, because I know your audience knows their Disney. Might be familiar with Mark Davis, who was one of the great animators, one of the 9 Old Men. We interviewed him on a Tuesday. 3 Wednesdays later, he had passed on.
Oh. So you had the last interview with him, and Alice, his wife, Alice Davis, was also with him. So I think that you're absolutely right with the light shining down on this production, because when I think about it, around this time, and maybe 3 or 4 years later, many of these people we've lost. And where are you going to be able to preserve this? That's another reason people ask me, why do you do your podcast? I said, I just want to hear from people that I admire their work. Like, I admire all 3 of you, and I want to hear how it was done. And what you guys did was the same thing back then, but you got to make a film. And that's why I've seen this documentary many times, because I love Walt, but I just love the craftsmanship that you guys put together. Let me just show a behind the scenes clip, because I do want to encourage people to buy the DVD or the Blu-ray, because there's a lot of great behind the scenes extras that we don't really get from other DVDs nowadays. So here's a clip. Let's play it.
Oh, this is not a whitewash. This is an honest story about my grandpa, about the man that he was.
The timing of the film is propitious in that it's his 100th birthday coming up. I think it's important for people to hear the people who knew Walt Disney best, the people who worked for him and his family, tell the stories themselves.
I mean, imagine to tell the story of a man who, in Peter Allen Shaw's words, was an ordinary man with extraordinary talents. That enigma, that riddle, is what we were after.
To see them all light up and to see them all get smiles and beam when they're referring to my grandpa and the years that they worked with him, it's pretty exciting.
I forgot about that.
We all look so young.
We do. We do.
You still do.
Thank you.
I'm going to jump way ahead in time, just because of what Walter Elias Disney Miller just said about them beaming, them lighting up. The very first showing, JP, this is right, isn't it? The very first showing was a private showing in which we had many of the people who had been, there were 77 interviews done for the film. And many of them were there in the audience. And the end, of course, is sad. I mean, it's a sad ending. He dies. And by this point, we were successful, I think, in making people feel like they knew him. And the audience was just full of tears. All these men and women who had known him, who had worked with him, who cared about him, they were all just, I mean, it was like the saddest film anybody had ever seen, despite the fact that it was bringing back such good memories for all of them.
One of the things we found, one of the things I was going to say that we found interesting as we interviewed people was how many of the people who knew him and who were close to him, even the many years after his death, were still talking about him in the present tense.
Yeah.
They would say, like when we travel together, Walt says, it just kind of was striking to me.
Yeah, and what Rachel said reminded me that, we cut the film on a Mac computer in our studio, which was in Culver City at the time. And few people know this, but this was the first film to be edited on Final Cut Pro on a computer, theatrical film. So we had the film on this huge Mac computer, and Diane and Ron came in to see the first cut. And Diane and Ron sat next to me, and I said, "Are you ready?" She says, "Yes, I'm ready." And we played the film, and the first cut was 3 hours. That's how much material we had. It was 3 hours. Of course, ABC later said, we can only do 2 hours with commercial breaks, so we had to cut it up. But we played the whole 3 hours. And then we came to the end, and Diane Disney Miller stared at the screen for a while. And then she said something to me that I have never forgotten. I've always cherished it. She said, "My dad would have been so proud." And that just sums up the effort that we all put into it. I mean, we really wanted to capture the genius that was Walt Disney. And yet here's a man who mortgaged his house to do Snow White. I mean, can you imagine any of the studio heads today mortgaging their house to finance a film? It's ridiculous. But that was typically Walt. And so what Rich and Katherine and I and Kathy tried to do is to pay tribute to that genius.
It's so interesting you mentioned that they talk about Walt in present tense. With several of my interviews with other individuals who have also worked with Walt, the same thing. And I guess in a way, maybe a lot of these people haven't even talked about that horrible portion, that time at the Disney Studios where they lost Walt. And it sounds like there was this overwhelming amount of grief. And all three of you were talking about that with them. And I think a lot of these people probably haven't talked about it in public or with anybody else. So as somebody who recently lost a loved one in their own life, I was watching the documentary and I was thinking of it in that perspective, because you were truly hearing from these people and things that they probably didn't ever want to talk about or say. And it's a very sad time. But when you talk about somebody in the present sense, I think it's one of those things where it's like, they're always with you and you know that they would be proud of you of what you were doing. So that's just kind of how I saw it. Did you feel that was what you were kind of connecting with when you were discussing this with everybody individually?
It was very much a conscious decision to ask so I mentioned there were 77 interviews. Some of those were historians who had not known Walt themselves any more than we had. But with the exception of the historians, the people who knew him, every single one we asked as the last question, we asked, where were you? What did you feel? What were you thinking about when he died? And in at least a few cases, people were tearing up while they were. Buddy Ebsen, for example, I remember very well. I think he was kind of prepared, but I don't think he was prepared for the emotions that he felt. But he sang the Mickey Mouse song because he heard it on the car radio on his way home when he heard that Walt Disney had died. And these men who had been great figures in some in animation, some in film, some in writers, some music people, all of them were were devastated, and that's not too strong a word.
No, it's true. And I think a lot of people ask the what ifs, but this film doesn't ask that. This film delves into his life and a lot of things we had never heard or seen of before. All these home videotapes. I think Diane Disney Miller, his daughter, had provided those to you. And my one of my key questions I was going to ask is, when you have the family involved in the making of a film, are there things that they tell you we'd like to steer away from, or I don't want you to use this or that, or were you kind of given free reign?
Free reign.
Yeah, we were very impressed with both Walt and Lily's daughters, but the fact that they really wanted to tell the story of who he was. And it had been frustrating to them that other people were painting stories of who they thought he was, and he was a very different person to different people. I mean, he was a tough boss, and he didn't compliment people a lot, but he was completely different at home, and he was very devoted to his family and to his children, and he spent so much time when they were young just with them. I mean, he's the one who drove them to school and took them to parks, and he was really a very involved father, and that would have been and was a surprise to some of the people who worked with him and who just saw him as a tough boss.
And more than just free reign, exorbitant free reign. If you looked at the photographs of Walt Disney that the studio was putting out while he was alive, you would never see a cigarette. They made sure that you couldn't, because cigarette smoking would maybe make people think badly of him. And Diane, of course, Walt died of lung cancer, and he was a smoker all his life. And Diane insisted that we make sure people understood that he died of lung cancer and understood that he smoked. And we made a point of it. And we always felt, and she felt, I think, that this was perhaps for the younger people watching the documentary, that this would be a lesson and something that they could learn.
I have to give Richard and Katherine credit here, because the way we sort of divided labor, I focused on the footage part, the film part. But Richard and Katherine went into the studio, into the archives, and I cannot imagine anyone having given the complete run of the archive as Richard and Katherine did. They were able to pull everything they wanted. I mean, we all know that the Disney company is sometimes very close-mouthed and difficult to penetrate. But in this case, Richard and Katherine went in there, spent day after day after day, going through the entire archive. And that's why the film has these incredible photographs and pictures due to their research and their dedication. I mean, we could not have done it without those beautiful illustrations. The home movies, of course, is wonderful. I mean, we were perhaps the first filmmakers to have given access to these home movies from the very, very beginning to that very last footage of the boat ride where the whole family took a vacation on the boat. And that's where we have that final footage of Walt lifting his hat. That is the end of it.
Yeah.
That was filmed during that vacation.
And Diane gave us all of them. And she just gave us reel after reel of home movies, and we watched. There was an awful lot of Diane and Sharon swimming.
There were a lot of them swimming. There were seven running hours of home movies.
Good Lord.
Most of which, the unfortunate part was there weren't so many of Walt because he was mostly behind the camera instead of in front of it.
But one of the things that was fascinating was the films that he was taking in the 1920s and 30s, very early home movies that you really saw what he was interested in, because he was taking movies of little mechanical toys and the movement of mechanical toys, and you could sort of think about how that developed into the audio animatronic figures later on.
Or there's a bit of the home movie that you'll never find in a documentary or anyplace else, where he was taking about 40 seconds of a crab crawling across a wall.
A great deal of nature too.
Because he thought it was interesting and he wanted to get a picture of the crab.
And there's that wonderful shot that you saw in the trailer that you just showed us, of him biking with his children on the studio lot. On Sunday they went biking, and that was in color. But this was wartime, so it was extremely difficult to get a color movie. It was filmed. It was very, very early on, but Walt had to have it, so there are lots of wonderful clips like that in the film.
And as we said, you interviewed 77 people for the film. How much time would you have for each interview? Did a lot of people wanted to kind of stay and talk more? Sometimes I get that on my show, but how did you kind of process the interview?
They varied in terms of the amount of film we would take. There were some people. I mean, Katherine did the interviews with Diane, and I don't remember, but maybe it was 2.5 hours of film of Diane alone, because we wanted her to be able to pop into the film and be a partial narrator. Others, there was a guy who was a polo player, friend of Walt's. And that was about a 20-minute film clip. That was about 20 minutes we did, because really all he knew about Walt was playing polo with him, and you can really only ask so many questions about polo.
Yeah, and the thing is, of course, we were filming on film, so the negative part of shooting on film is that every 10 minutes we had to change the magazine, 400-foot magazine. So, I mean, Rich
picks up the
tried
flow,
to keep the conversation going, and meanwhile, the cinematographer and his assistant frantically trying to load another magazine. But that's what happens with film. It's typically when you shoot a Hollywood movie, you do a scene of like 2 or 3 minutes at a time, a setup, as we call it, and then we change the setup. So that's not. But with a running interview, you run through a magazine very, very quickly, and it was just a lot of fun. Yeah.
And I don't know if JP did the same thing with Katherine as he did with me, but he was always sitting behind me as I was asking the questions, and I'm sure he did the same with you. And he had not a ruler, but like a little stick, and to give us like 30 seconds warning that we were about to run out of the magazine. There'd be a little tap on the back, so to sum up, so that we wouldn't be in the middle of a sentence and then have to restart it again.
Yeah.
Smart thinking.
And I remember with Diane, we actually did 2 sets of interviews. You guys remember that?
Oh,
we
yeah.
did one in the studio, and then I don't know if it was prompted by her or by us, but then we went to her home and we did another set of interviews. And I think the second was better than the first.
I remember that.
Agree? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. One of the things I wanted to say is just how much fun we had. All of us were working together. I mean, we worked together so well, and enjoyed being with the family too, because they were so interested in what we were doing, and always kind, and just fun to be with. And also Walter Elias Disney Miller, who was so involved with the whole thing. You saw him on the clip that you used, but he really was a fundamental part of making this film as well.
I mean, I remember, and I'm sure JP will remember this as well. We were taking film of the house in Kansas City. On Bell Fountain.
That's right.
And we needed to clean up it was not in a great area I don't know that it ever was, but it certainly wasn't by the time we got there. And Walt Disney's grandson, was helping us. He was sweeping off the porch floor so that it would so we wouldn't have leaves floating around. I mean, he was involved in that way, and very much. I mean, the central collaboration was, of course, the four of us, Katherine and myself and JP and Kathy Labrador, but the family was just so deeply involved. In fact, Diane, I believe, was there in the back of the screening room for the interviews that were done in the screening room. She was there in the back of the screening room, greeting her guests who were being interviewed.
Oh.
As you can see on this picture, Diana's at the far right, and she is welcoming Ollie Johnston and Frank Thomas, the two legendary animators of Snow White.
And their wives.
And their wives, yes. And Richard is just in the background.
Peeking out
and me peeking out from the back.
That's right. But that's absolutely true. And Diane wanted to be involved and welcome people to the set, and it's great. Here we're with
she learned to be a good hostess like her dad.
Yeah.
And what screening was this at? Was this
this
the
was
big screening
in Telluride, where the film not premiered, because the premiere was in Hollywood, but this was one of the film festivals we went to, Telluride, which was at the time an extremely important film festival, and we were then involved. We were then invited to screen the film at the Monte Carlo Film Festival, which was wonderful. They wanted to open the Monte Carlo Film Festival with the film. And I remember Kathy and I were walking in Monte Carlo, and we weren't really looking at traffic, and we were almost run over by a big bus. And this Monte Carlo bus drove past us. On the bus was a big sign, "Walt, the man behind the myth." And we were like, "What?" And they made a big deal.
So as I was saying, that the official premiere for all audiences happened only mere days, 5 days after 9/11. So I'm sure that's what you were referring to in regards to that crazy time. So what was happening beforehand, and what was the feedback you got after the premiere? I was just curious.
Well, let me just put in a little bit. I believe, and I think this may be true for JP, it certainly is true for Katherine and me, the most difficult part of creating this film, and it was a lot of work, was after 9/11, and it was going to be on The Wonderful World of Disney. And Michael Eisner said he wanted to do an 8-minute or 9-minute introduction to this film that we had meticulously been cutting to get to space 5 seconds at a time, 8 seconds at a time. So in 3 days, we went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, getting out clips of 5 seconds, 8 seconds, 10 seconds to make it fit for what we now had to show. The DVD has, of course, the full 2-hour show, and more than you'd ever have seen actually on The Wonderful World of Disney, because we didn't need to have room for commercials.
But it was wasn't it one of the first, it was one of the first entertainment films shown after
That's right.
9/11.
Oh, it was.
That's right.
It was
Mike-
the first. It was the
Michael
first
Eisner,
ABC.
introduced the film saying that, don't forget that the country had just been inundated with footage from Ground Zero for days on, day after day after day. It was footage of Ground Zero and the smoke and the firemen and everything. And then Michael Eisner came on at prime time and said, we're now going to return to regular scheduled programming. And the best way to do that is to go back to being what America is all about and what being an American is all about. And that is the best way to do that, is to show you this film about Walt Disney. So even though we had to slice and dice to get the time in, it was wonderful that the president of Disney introduced the film right after, when he felt that the country was ready to go back to regular programming.
And the other two networks at that point were still all news.
Yeah, I'm sure this was a relief, or again another break from such travesty that the nation was having at the time, and somebody had just put on YouTube the entire broadcast. So I wanted to share a clip towards the end, right before the finale. Eisner comes back and lists a quote from Walt I had never heard before, so I just wanted to play this clip for you.
Tonight, America continues to mourn. For as Walt said in 1941 from the Metropolitan Opera House in New York, tomorrow will be better. For as long as America keeps alive the ideals of freedom and a better life, all men will want to be free and share our way of life. I thank God and America, he said, for the right to live and raise my family under the flag of tolerance, democracy, and freedom.
So just a unique way of unfortunately having to release the film. And I'm sure, what was the feedback you felt that you got from that? Do you think a lot of people were happy with the film when they finally got to see it? And
well, I don't know. I liked it a lot.
One sign of the popularity of the film is that it was then broadcast all over the world. I mean, it was broadcast in Germany, in France, in Italy, in Spain, in Japan. So we had a distributor for the film, and the film was a smash hit all around the world. Perhaps as a result of the 9/11 events, we don't know. And of course, Walt Disney has a very strong international presence, the company, to this day. But I think the feedback was, the New York Times wrote a very kind article about the film when it came out. So I think in general, the response was very positive. Don't you think, Rich and Catherine?
Oh, absolutely. And there was actually a second life to it when the DVD came out. There were many, many, many reviews. And I mean, I read them over and over. I mean, it was just so much fun to see, because really, we got a lot of credit. And this comes back to the very good question that you asked earlier on, Tammy, about not whitewashing things. We got an awful lot of credit for that. We got a lot of credit for showing parts of Walt's life. Like, for example, he did give testimony for the HUAC committee.
Yes.
And we might have decided, well, we could leave that out, just a tiny little thing. People might misunderstand. We put it into context. We put it in the film. Diane wanted it in the film. We wanted it in the film. And we got an awful lot of credit for putting it there, because so many of, there have been a lot written about Walt, and there have been other documentaries. Only most of the others tend to be on the
negative
jolly side of the street. No.
Jolly. Okay.
The books, many of them were quite negative. Actually, that's how, when we first started our first book, The Man Behind the Magic, the fundamental reason that the Disney family wanted to work with us was another book had just come out that was not just slanderous, it was malodorous. I won't name it because that could be actually libelous. But there were error after error after error. The error that we kind of always pointed out was that they talked about a girlfriend of Walt's who wasn't a girl, it was a boy. It just had the same name that could be a male or a female, and that was in the documentaries, not the documentary, the book. So the Disney family was intent on getting the real story out.
And from the people who were there, you know what I mean? A lot of people write these stories and they were not there. It's hearsay. You guys got it from the actual people who were there.
The interesting thing is that when the three of us started to write the screenplay, we had a complete screenplay with the story, but we knew that most of what we had written would be eliminated because the whole idea was to have a narrative basis for the interviews. So the actual editing process was a task of taking an interview clip and placing that in the screenplay where we had written it in the third person. And so in the process, the whole screenplay was basically swapped out for actual interview segments. But we knew we needed to have the story from the beginning to the end as a basis to work with in our interview questions. So that's why it was really great. And we felt it was important that it was people who knew Walt personally who would speak, because a lot of things were said about Walt. Was he an informant for the FBI and all that nonsense? And we felt if a third voice would narrate the film, it would not have the credibility. But if people who knew Walt personally, it would have the credibility to really show Walt what he was.
Even insofar as the fact that we were able to, I'm very lucky to get a narrator, which was Dick Van Dyke, who I guess is about to turn 100. Dick Van Dyke,
yes, that's true.
knew Walt, and he revered Walt and had worked with him on a few projects, and it was great having even the narrator for the film being someone who had known Walt.
Yeah.
And it all came together beautifully. And I know we have limited time. So to celebrate, because it's Walt's 124th birthday today, and I thought I'd ask you, because again, with all of your research that you did for the film, there are many things you found out, I'm sure, about Walt you didn't know. So if you had the chance to ask Walt at least one question, I'm just curious what each of you would have asked him.
That's a good question.
What do you think we ought to do if we're doing a documentary about you?
No, I would have asked, what would you really have hoped that Epcot turned into? Because it was just the beginning.
That's a great question.
Through all
that's
sorts
a great
of
question.
transformations.
Yeah, Epcot today is not what Walt envisioned at all. And that was we really wanted to spend some time on the whole Epcot situation. We had an animation artist create animation footage. I mean, you're talking about the early 2000s, so it's not the quality that we have today. But there is wonderful animation footage in the film of what Epcot really should have looked like had Walt lived. And I think I would join that question.
Yeah, and actually, I need to give JP some credit here. Kath and I were able to find in the Imagineering offices a man named Marty Sklar, who knew Walt very well and was running Imagineering, got us access to, as far as I know, nobody else had seen the sketches that had been put for what Walt wanted Epcot to be. And JP was able to, with his technological minions, turn that into something so that when we see that the overfly of what Epcot might have been, those really came from exactly what Walt at that point in time thought Epcot should be. But of course, we always had to admit to ourselves that it would have changed.
Always evolving.
That it would have evolved. It would be something entirely different. It was only what we knew as of the last moment that there was anything to know.
It was going to be a laboratory for anything new that came out of American technology companies, and everything it would be a test case. It would be a petri dish for everything that this country could produce, and where people could live happily and with the latest technology. That was the vision.
Well, again, thank you all for coming on the show tonight. I've watched this film since I was 5, and I love it very much. And just watching it again with a different perspective it's such a beautiful piece. And I'm so glad you guys, you were at the right place, the right time, and you made a beautiful piece that I'm so glad Diane Disney Miller told you that, because I think the same thing. I think Walt would have been really proud with what you delivered. You told his story, and so many people now have a better idea of the man, especially with all these new things that are coming out. He now has an AA, and I'm just kind of curious how this is going to change with how people view Walt, because this was like the biggest thing at the time for us to understand who he was, especially for those who weren't alive, because, you know, some of us grew up with him, like my dad. I didn't. So now we have a different generations of introducing Walt, and yours was the early 21st century. So thank you all so much. I'd love to do a Kodak moment. We look at the camera and we're all going to smile on the count of 3. Ready? 1, 2, 3, smile. And thank you again. And everybody who's been watching, thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you'd like to see more reunions and more conversations, just like today, make sure you subscribe, click that little bell icon. Again, I appreciate you guys being on the show. Thank you so much for your time, and happy birthday, Walt. And thank you again.
And thank you.
Thank you. You're very kind.
Thanks for having us. Take care. Bye-bye.
Have a great evening, everybody. And remember, fate is kind. She brings to those who love. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.